Hello, and welcome to the Book Tapestry. What does it mean to own a library of books that you never intend to read? Have you ever considered that a physical object could be real but spiritually hollow? Welcome back to the show. I'm Sophia Wordsmith, and this is episode 19. Today, we're stepping into the library of one of literature's most famous mansions, but we aren't here for the parties. We're here for the silence. In F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, there is a minor character named Owl Eyes who discovers something unsettling about Jay Gatsby's massive library. The books are real, they have pages, and they are high quality, but they are uncut. In the world of rare book collecting, have you ever seen the folded edges of paper that have never been sliced open with a paper knife? To read them, you'd have to violate the seal. They are trapped in a state of being without becoming. Does this not mirror the man himself? Jay Gatsby has the estate, the hydroplanes, and the old sport catchphrase, but like his books, hasn't much of his life remained unopened? From a Sartrean perspective, Gatsby is trying to reverse the fundamental principle of existentialism, the idea that existence precedes essence. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that we aren't born with a fixed soul. We exist first, and then define ourselves through our choices. We are the authors of our own essence. But what happens when a man tries to purchase an essence in advance? Gatsby builds a ready-made identity to overwrite the messy, impoverished reality of James Gats. Is he not the ultimate uncut book, a life of extraordinary potential that refuses to be opened? Is it possible that opening the pages might expose the terrifying reality that nothing permanent lies inside? Today, we perform a Sartrean autopsy on the man who tried to turn his life into a museum of potential. How much of our own essence is just a collection of uncut pages we're afraid to slice open? To truly understand the mechanics of Gatsby's failure, we have to look past the silk shirts and the parties and examine the literal architecture of his preservation. Gatsby's library isn't a sanctuary for thought or a place for late-night study, it is a preservation chamber. It is a place where culture goes not to be lived, but to be taxidermied. To explain why this is so haunting, we have to turn to Jean-Paul Sartre's fundamental distinction between two types of existence: being in itself, or en-soi, and being for itself, or pour soi. In the Sartrean universe, objects, like a rock, a table, or a sealed book, are en-soi. They are fixed, complete, and utterly lacking in consciousness. They simply are. Humans, however, are pour soi. We are fluid, perpetually incomplete, and defined specifically by the fact that we lack a fixed, permanent essence. We are a nothingness that must constantly choose what we are becoming. Gatsby's profound tragedy is that he deeply, desperately desires to be an object. He wants to possess the solidity of a bona fide leather-bound book because objects don't have to deal with the anxiety of choice or the passage of time. He doesn't want to be a reader who engages with the messiness of a story. He wants to be a curator of appearances who stands outside of the narrative. This is the hidden engine of his dream, the belief that life can be frozen in its ideal form, much like a museum exhibit. He doesn't just want Daisy Faye, he wants the crystalline version of Daisy from 1917, a version untouched by 5 years of history, the complications of marriage, or the biological reality of motherhood. By surrounding himself with uncut books, Gatsby is making a symbolic stand against the cut of time. In the world of rare editions, as long as a book remains uncut, it preserves a state of endless, shimmering possibility. The moment you slide a knife through those pages to read them, possibility collapses into reality. You risk the disappointment of a mediocre text or a tragic ending. Gatsby avoids this existential risk by keeping the seals intact. He realizes that unopened things are far easier to worship than the lived reality of a human being. He chooses the stasis of the object over the becoming of the man, effectively turning his entire existence into a beautiful, unreadable shelf of potential. But even within this meticulously preserved state, a quiet, chemical rot is taking place. Think about what happens to paper over decades. It yellows through oxidation, a slow decay that perfectly mirrors the degradation of Gatsby's dream beneath its polished, expensive surface. In Fitzgerald's symbolic landscape, yellow is never gold. Yellow is the color of approximation, of imitation, and what Sartre would call bad faith, the act of lying to oneself to escape the burden of freedom. The yellow car, the yellow cocktail music, these are not the solid, inherited gold of the Buchanans. They are a frantic, hollow performance of a reality Gatsby doesn't actually possess. Owl Eyes acts as our existential detective here, peering through the spectacles of truth to identify the gap between what these books are, real physical objects, and what they do, which is absolutely nothing. He recognizes that Gatsby has constructed a world of perceived depth, that is, in reality, only 1 inch thick. But while Owl Eyes merely uncovers the stasis, it is Tom Buchanan who eventually performs the violent, public dissection of Gatsby's character. Tom represents hard being, a state of existence Gatsby can never achieve because Tom doesn't have to perform his status. He inhabits it with a brutal, unthinking confidence that feels as heavy as granite. Tom is the man of facticity, a being defined entirely by his bloodline, his history, and his physical power. This is where Sartre's concept of the look, or le regard, becomes a weapon of mass destruction. Sartre explains that when another person looks at us, we are suddenly stripped of our subjectivity. We become mere objects in their world, losing our autonomy to their interpretation. Tom's gaze is paternal, narrowed, and utterly contemptuous. He doesn't see a war hero or a tragic romantic. He sees a common swindler in a pink suit. In the sweltering heat of the Plaza Hotel, Tom assumes the role of the authorized reader of Gatsby's life. He takes the Oxford Man title, which was Gatsby's most prized, uncut page, and he doesn't just read it, he rips it open with a blunt, cruel finger. This is a moment of pure ontological violence. Tom's look freezes Gatsby's becoming midair, shattering his linguistic shield of old sport and forcing him back into the object of James Gats. In that moment, Gatsby experiences the true Sartrean nausea, the sickening realization of being exposed as a fraud, a broken machine that has malfunctioned in the eyes of the elite. This objectification by Tom is catastrophic because Gatsby's entire project is fundamentally predicated on being read correctly by one specific person, Daisy Fay. We often look at his pursuit as a tragic romance, but through a Sartrean lens, it is something much more desperate. It is a quest for the ultimate validation of being. Gatsby needs Daisy to serve as his witness. In the existential struggle for identity, we often look to another person to anchor our essence, hoping their gaze will confirm the version of ourselves we wish to project. Gatsby believes that if the gold girl recognizes him as an equal, his yellow imitation will finally undergo a chemical transformation and become real gold. He sees her as the final seal on his self-creation, the one who can validate his Oxford Man persona and make it objective truth. This is why he demands the impossible from her in the Plaza Hotel. If she says she never loved Tom, she effectively erases 5 years of objective history. In Gatsby's mind, this would allow him to maintain the illusion that time is circular, that the uncut state of his life is permanent, and that he can simply return to the moment before the first page was ever turned. However, Daisy refuses to remain a fixed, silent object in his personal museum. When she breaks down and admits that she loved both men, she is exercising her radical Sartrean freedom. She refuses to be the seal on his identity. By asserting her own messy, conflicting history, she shatters Gatsby's carefully curated exhibition. This is the moment of the true collapse, where Gatsby discovers that the world of old money is not the solid, ivory tower he imagined. Instead, it is what Sartre describes as the viscous or the slimy. In Sartrean ontology, the viscous, or viscu, is a terrifying substance that traps the hand. It appears to be a solid object, but it dissolves and clings when you try to grasp it. Gatsby spends years trying to enter the solid world of the elite, only to find it has no real foundation. It is a world of careless people who smash things up, and then retreat back into their money or their vast carelessness. For Gatsby, this means the wealth and status he sought can never be truly inhabited as a permanent state of being. It can only be performed. He is left clutching at a slimy reality that offers no resistance and no support, leaving him stuck in the no-man's land between a past he cannot repeat and a future that has just dissolved. The collapse of Gatsby's social performance forces a dramatic shift in the novel's sensory experience, moving us away from the dry, controlled spaces of the mansion and into a cold, wet reality. If we look closely, the novel's geography is actually a map of existential states. Most of the narrative unfolds in dry rooms, expensive cars, and tailored suits. This is the realm of the Uncut Book, where every environment is staged, climate-controlled, and safe from the elements. But the movement toward the swimming pool in the final chapters represents a terrifying transition into what we might call wet reality. Unlike a leather-bound book or a static estate, water cannot be preserved or sealed. It is a world of immersion, flow, and inevitable change. To reach this final destination, we have to cross the Valley of Ashes, the industrial wasteland that represents the Sartrean nothingness. It is here we find George Wilson. Covered in the gray dust of entropy, Wilson serves as the messenger of the void. He is the embodiment of the facticity that Gatsby spent his entire life trying to outrun, the inescapable reality of our birth, our failures, and our mortality. When Gatsby finally steps into his pool, he is performing what is arguably his first truly authentic act in years. It's a haunting detail that he has owned this pool all summer but has never once used it. By finally submerging himself, he leaves the dry, brittle world of social performance and enters an element that doesn't care about his old sport persona. In the water, Gatsby is no longer a symbol of wealth or a mythic figure. He is a vulnerable human being subject to the basic laws of gravity and the trajectory of a bullet. The water acts as a universal solvent, dissolving the metaphorical formaldehyde of his riches and exposing the raw, shivering existence hidden behind his leather-bound lies. This immersion marks the final, irreversible change from yellow to red. Throughout the book, yellow was the color of bad faith and imitation. Red, however, is the for itself finally meeting its physical limits. It is the color of blood and undeniable truth. George Wilson's bullet acts as the final, jagged paper knife, opening Gatsby's life just as Owl Eyes once opened those books in the library. As the red circle spreads in the water, we realize it is the only bona fide ink Gatsby has ever produced, the final proof that his pages have at last been cut, exposing the tragic reality of the man inside. In the end, Jean-Paul Sartre argued that in death, a man is finalized. He becomes nothing more and nothing less than the sum of his actions, his total act. This is the precise moment where Gatsby's greatness actually emerges from the wreckage. Unlike Tom and Daisy, whom Sartre would likely label as sallow, or stuffed shirts, Gatsby is different. The Buchanans are stuffed because they hide behind the safety of inherited gold and the armor of their social class, never once risking their comfortable being. But Gatsby risks everything. He commits himself to what Sartre called a useless passion, an intense, localized drive to change the unchangeable. Even if the goal was a hollow illusion, the intensity of his commitment demands a certain existential respect. He fundamentally refused to remain the nothingness he was born as. If we return to our library metaphor, if Gatsby is the uncut book, then Nick Carraway is the one who finally performs the surgery to cut the pages. Throughout the novel, Nick is the one who recognizes the nausea of the Buchanan's world, the sickening, viscous lack of purpose in East Egg. Yet, he also recognizes the strange heroism in Gatsby's attempt to carve a soul out of thin air. Gatsby himself could never cut his own pages. He was too terrified that if he opened the seal, he would find only the nothingness of James Gats staring back. But Nick cuts them narratively. By taking up the pen, Nick takes Gatsby's uncut potential and gives it a tragic, permanent structure. He transforms the yellow myth of a bootlegger into a red record of a human spirit, an act of profound existential responsibility. Gatsby died exactly as he lived, a bona fide masterpiece of self-deception, finally opened by a world that simply has no room for dreamers. By the time he was floating in that pool, he was no longer a dreamer or a great figure, he was an object, pure en-soi. But his greatness lay in the sheer scale of his refusal to accept his assigned identity. He built an entire universe for Daisy's gaze, and though he failed to turn his yellow imitation into solid gold, the red of his final sacrifice gave his life a weight, and a truth that the Buchanans, in all their golden safety, will never possess. I'm Sophia Wordsmith. And this has been episode 19. Thanks for listening, and remember, the pages of your life are waiting to be cut. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Book Tapestry. If you found this helpful, please share it with a friend who prefers listening over reading. See you next time.